Chapter 1. The Hard Beginning. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inspiring English. I'm so happy you're here today, because this story is not just about learning English. It's about life itself. It's about dreams, struggles, and the quiet battles we all face when no one is watching. So before we begin, take a deep breath, relax, and let these words remind you of something simple but true. Nothing comes easy. There was once a young man named Daniel. He was 22, full of energy and dreams, yet trapped in a small town surrounded by soft green hills and fading gray streets. Every morning, he woke to the sound of his father's old bus engine coughing to life, and his mother humming softly as she cleaned her uniform for another long night of work. His father was a bus driver, always on the road, returning home late with tired eyes and sore hands. His mother worked as a cleaner in an office building 2 towns away, her nights filled with the smell of chemicals and loneliness. They worked hard, but no matter how much they did, the bills always seemed to grow faster than their pay. Still, they smiled, because sometimes when you have nothing, love becomes everything. Daniel often sat quietly, watching them with a heart that felt both proud and broken. He loved them deeply, but he hated seeing them worn out. He hated the cracks on his mother's hands, the way his father pretended not to limp after a long shift. He wanted to give them something better, a life with peace, warmth, and laughter. But all he had were dreams, ever since he was a teenager. Daniel dreamed of opening a small coffee shop, not a fancy one with gold lamps or velvet chairs, just a cozy corner filled with the smell of roasted beans and quiet music, a place where people could relax, talk, and smile. He imagined his parents sitting by the window, sipping coffee proudly, free from worries. But dreams cost money, and Daniel's pockets were always empty. He worked small jobs, washing cars, delivering newspapers, helping at the local market. Yet every coin disappeared into the endless list of daily needs, rent, food, and sometimes medicine. At night, when everyone slept, Daniel would sit by the window and whisper to himself, "One day, I'll open that shop. I don't know how, but I will." He didn't know it yet, but that quiet whisper was the first brick of his dream. One winter evening, the sky was heavy and gray. The cold wind whistled through the cracks of their little house. The lights flickered weakly while his father sat at the table, counting their last few bills. His mother wrapped herself in an old blanket to keep warm. Daniel watched in silence, his chest tight with worry. He wanted to help, to do something. But the question of how kept echoing in his mind. It's one of the hardest feelings in life, to want to change everything but not know where to start. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "One day," he said softly, "I'll make life easier for us." His father looked up, and for a moment, his tired eyes softened. He gave a small smile, the kind that carries both pain and pride, and said, "Son, nothing is free. Every dream has a price, and that price is hard work." Daniel didn't reply, but those words sank deep into his heart like seeds buried in soil, waiting for their time to grow. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, repeating his father's words again and again. Every dream has a price. What was the price for his? He had no money, no experience, no help, only a heart that refused to stop believing. Yet somewhere inside, something began to change. Maybe it was courage, maybe it was faith, but he felt a small spark begin to burn in his chest. A voice inside whispered, "Start small, do something, anything." That thought became the fire that would one day change everything. The next morning, Daniel walked through town under the pale sky. The air smelled of rain and dust. He passed the bakery, the flower shop, the bus stop, places filled with faces he saw every day, people who were also struggling, just like his family. Then he noticed something. A small crowd was gathering around a food cart near the station. They were buying coffee, but not the good kind, just instant powder mixed with hot water. Still, people lined up. It hit him suddenly. The nearest cafe was 10 kilometers away. He whispered, "What if I sell coffee right here? Not in a shop, just a small stand, fresh and warm." It sounded ridiculous, but sometimes ridiculous ideas are the first steps to freedom. That evening, as his parents sat in their small living room, Daniel finally spoke. "Dad, I think I know how to start," he said. His father looked up. "Start what?" "My dream," Daniel replied. "Maybe not a coffee shop yet, but I can sell coffee on the street." His father didn't laugh. He simply nodded slowly, his eyes full of quiet curiosity. "And how will you do that?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I'll find a way." Later that night, while everyone slept, he sat at the kitchen table with a torn piece of paper and a pencil. He drew a simple sketch, a small wooden stand with a sign that said, "Daniel's Brew." It was rough, but it was real. It was his beginning. The next morning, he walked across town to meet Mr. Collins, an old man who owned a small coffee roastery. People said he was grumpy and never trusted anyone, but Daniel had no choice. He needed beans, and he had no money. When he arrived, Mr. Collins didn't even look up at first. "What do you want, boy?" he said in a dry voice. Daniel stood tall and answered, "Sir, I want to sell your coffee in my town, but I don't have money to buy it yet. Can you trust me for 1 week?" The old man's eyebrows rose. "Why should I trust you?" Daniel looked him straight in the eye. "Because I'll work harder than anyone you've ever met." There was a long silence. Then, to Daniel's surprise, Mr. Collins sighed. "1 week," he said. "Don't fail me." Daniel could hardly believe it. He thanked the old man again and again before running home. That night, he couldn't sleep. Hope filled his chest like a warm light. For the first time in years, the impossible didn't feel so far away. Before sunrise, Daniel was already awake. He boiled water in his mother's old kettle, filled 2 thermos bottles, and borrowed a few cups from the neighbor. His hands trembled with nervous excitement as he set up a small table near the bus stop. The air was cold, his breath white with frost. "Please," he whispered to himself, "let this work." The first few people walked by without stopping. They were too busy, too tired. But Daniel smiled anyway. "Fresh coffee, warm your morning?" he called. Some ignored him, some smiled politely. Then, an older man stopped. Daniel offered him a small cup for free. The man took a sip and smiled. Hey, this is good. How much? $1, Daniel said, his heart pounding. I'll take 2. That was how it began. By the end of the day, Daniel had sold every drop of coffee. He came home exhausted but glowing with pride. He handed the money to his mother. Mom, he said softly, I did it. I really did it. She hugged him tightly, tears shining in her eyes. That night, Daniel lay awake again, but this time, his heart was light. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew something else. His father had been right. Nothing is free. Every dream has a price. And Daniel had just paid the first small coin of it, because that's how every dream begins. Not with luck, not with magic, but with a single act of courage when the world still doubts you. Chapter 2. The Spark. The next morning, the world looked different. The same sun rose over the same quiet town. But for Daniel, something had changed. His father's words from the night before, "Nothing is free, every dream has a price," still echoed in his mind. He didn't have money, but he had time, energy, and hope. Sometimes, that's all a dream really needs to start breathing. As Daniel walked through the narrow streets, the air was cool and fresh. People were opening their small shops, sweeping the dust from the front doors, and greeting neighbors with sleepy smiles. The smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakery on the corner. But one thing was missing: the smell of coffee. In this town, everyone loved coffee, but the nearest cafe was miles away. Daniel smiled to himself and whispered, "If there's no coffee here, maybe I should bring it to them." It sounded simple, but simple ideas often hide the biggest changes. By the time he reached the old bridge, Daniel's mind was racing. He imagined a small wooden stand near the bus stop. Early workers could buy a hot cup before work. He could greet them with a smile, maybe even remember their names. It wouldn't make him rich, but it could make a difference. For the first time in months, he felt alive with possibility. Then reality hit him. He had no coffee, no cups, no equipment, and not even $1 to start with. His dream was right in front of him, but his empty pockets felt like locked doors. That night, he couldn't stop thinking. He sat by the small kitchen table, staring at his mother's old kettle. It was scratched and dull from years of use, but to him, it looked like a key. "I'll start with this," he whispered. He didn't have money, but maybe he could borrow trust. So the next morning, with shaky hands and nervous courage, Daniel decided to visit the only person who sold coffee beans in town, an old roaster named Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins was known for being strict, maybe even cold. His shop smelled of roasted beans and smoke, the walls dark from years of work. When Daniel stepped inside, he felt small. The old man turned and frowned. "What do you want, boy?" he asked. Daniel swallowed hard but stood tall. "Sir, I want to sell your coffee in my town," he said, "but I don't have money to buy it first. Can you trust me for 1 week?" Mr. Collins looked at him with disbelief. "Trust you? Why should I trust a stranger?" Daniel's voice trembled, but his eyes didn't. "Because I'll work harder than anyone you've met. I'll prove it." The silence stretched between them like a rope about to snap. Finally, Mr. Collins sighed and said, "1 week. Don't fail me." When Daniel stepped out of the shop, the morning sunlight hit his face. He had no idea how he would do it. But one thing was clear. His dream had just begun. That night, he barely slept. Excitement and fear danced in his mind. He kept seeing images of people smiling with warm cups in their hands, at dawn, before the first light touched the hills. He was already in the kitchen boiling water in his mother's kettle. He poured the hot coffee into 2 old thermos bottles, borrowed a small table from the neighbor, and carried everything to the bus stop. The air was cold. His hands shook. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept repeating to himself, "Nothing comes easy. Just start." He placed the table near the corner where people usually waited for the bus. A few early workers passed by, their faces sleepy, their minds elsewhere. "Fresh coffee, warm your morning," Daniel called with a bright smile. No one stopped. For a few minutes, he stood there, feeling invisible. Doubt crept in. Maybe it was a stupid idea. Maybe no one wanted coffee from a stranger. But then he remembered his father's voice again. Every dream has a price. He took a deep breath, poured a small cup, and offered it to an old man walking by. "Sir, it's free. Just try it." The man hesitated, then took the cup. He smelled it, sipped slowly, and smiled. "Hey, this is good. How much?" $1, Daniel said quietly. The man nodded. "Give me 2. And just like that, the first sale happened. It wasn't luck. It was courage meeting opportunity. As the morning went on, people started noticing him. They liked the smell, the warmth, and the smile of the young man who never stopped calling out, "Fresh coffee, hot and ready." Some bought, some didn't, but every time someone stopped, Daniel felt his dream grow stronger. By noon, the thermos bottles were empty. He couldn't believe it. He had sold every cup. That evening, with tired feet, but a full heart, Daniel walked back to Mr. Collins's shop. He placed the money on the counter and said, "Here's your money, sir." The old man raised his eyebrows, surprised. "You kept your word," he said, and for the first time, he smiled. "Come back tomorrow." Daniel nodded, his eyes shining with pride. As he stepped back into the cool night, the world looked different again, not because it had changed, but because he had. That night, he sat by the window, looking at the stars. His mother had already gone to bed. His father's snores filled the house, but Daniel couldn't stop smiling. The small stand, the coffee, the people, it all felt real now. He whispered, "Dreams begin the moment you act, not when you wait." He didn't have a big cafe yet, but he had something much more powerful, the belief that he could create his own path. And that spark, small but alive, was the light that would guide him through every dark morning ahead. Chapter 3. The Common Traps. Success never travels in a straight line. It bends, it breaks, and sometimes it takes you back to the place where you started, just to test if you still have the same fire inside. For Daniel, the journey that had started with excitement soon became a series of small storms. He didn't expect it to be easy, but he never imagined how many lessons he would have to learn the hard way. The first few months of selling coffee felt like a dream. People began to recognize him, the young man with the bright smile and the steady hands. He was no longer invisible. Every morning, as he poured the first cup of steaming coffee, he felt proud, But life has a way of humbling us when we start to feel too comfortable, and soon, Daniel started to face the traps that every dreamer falls into. Mistake number 1, waiting for the perfect time. At first, Daniel thought he should wait before expanding his stand. Maybe next month, he told himself. When I have more money, more confidence, better weather. But weeks turned into months, and nothing really changed. One day, a kind old woman who bought his coffee every morning said, "Son, if you wait for the perfect moment, you'll grow old waiting." Those words hit him like lightning. He realized the perfect time doesn't exist. The world never stops spinning for us to be ready. If we wait for everything to be right, we'll never begin. That night, Daniel decided to stop waiting and start doing. He bought more cups, painted his small table, and began selling earlier every morning. Imperfect action, he learned, was better than perfect hesitation. Mistake number 2, trying to do everything alone. Daniel was proud, too proud. He believed asking for help was a sign of weakness. When the crowd grew larger, he still refused to let anyone assist him. He would carry heavy water containers, clean everything, brew, serve, count money, and smile all at once. He wanted to prove he could do it himself. But slowly, exhaustion began to eat him from the inside. One morning, while rushing to serve a customer, he spilled hot coffee on his hand. The pain was sharp, but what hurt more was the realization that he couldn't do this forever. The next day, his friend Maya, who often watched him from across the street, walked over and said, "You know, even heroes need help." Daniel finally smiled and asked her to join. Together, they worked faster and better. That day, he learned something important. Strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to let others walk beside you. Mistake number 3, fearing failure. When people first started complaining about his coffee, Daniel felt crushed. Some said it was too bitter. Others said it wasn't strong enough. Each comment felt like a tiny wound to his heart. He thought, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe this is where it ends. But instead of quitting, he decided to listen. Every cup of criticism became a lesson. He experimented with water temperature, bean texture, and brewing time. Slowly, his coffee improved. People noticed. A man who once said his drink tasted like burnt air came back weeks later and said, "This is amazing. Did you change something?" Daniel just smiled. Failure, he realized, wasn't an enemy. It was a teacher. It doesn't come to stop us. It comes to shape us. Mistake number 4, comparing himself to others. One morning, Daniel woke up to find a new cafe had opened right across the street. It was bright, modern, and full of decorations. They played music, gave discounts, and offered fancy drinks with cream on top. For the first time, Daniel's little stand felt small and dull. Customers started crossing the street. His heart sank. He stared at the crowd and thought, why would anyone buy from me when they have that? He spent nights worrying, replaying numbers, and doubting his place. But then, one morning as he brewed his first batch, he stopped himself. He looked at his own hands, the same hands that had built this dream from nothing, and whispered, "Don't copy others. Make your own flavor." The next day, he started focusing on what made him unique: his story, his smile, his personal touch. He greeted every customer by name, asked about their day, remembered how they liked their coffee. Slowly, people returned. They didn't come just for the drink. They came for the warmth. Daniel learned that comparison kills creativity. You don't have to be the biggest or the loudest to succeed. You just have to be real. Weeks passed, and though challenges never stopped, Daniel started to grow, not just as a seller, but as a person. He realized success isn't about never falling. It's about learning how to rise every time you do. Each mistake became part of his foundation. The long hours, the burns, the doubts, the fear. They were the fire that shaped him, like steel forged in flame. Sometimes, he would look back at the small boy who once whispered dreams under the stars and smile. He wasn't there yet, not by a long shot, but he was moving forward, and that was enough, because life, like coffee, needs time, patience, and a little heat to bring out its true flavor. Chapter 4. The Turning Point. Every dream has a moment when everything changes, not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because you do. For Daniel, that moment came one cold morning when he realized he couldn't just sell coffee. He needed to create it. His small stand had grown popular, but something inside him whispered, "There's more you can do. There's more you can become." That thought scared him, yet it also excited him. He wanted to roast his own coffee, to make something truly his, but he didn't know how. The only person who could teach him was Mr. Collins, the same man who had once trusted him for 1 week. So, the next day, Daniel took a deep breath, walked to the old roastery, and said, "Sir, can you teach me?" Mr. Collins looked up from the machine, smoke curling in the air. "Teach you?" He laughed. "If I teach you, you won't need me anymore." His voice was half joking but half serious. Daniel smiled softly and replied, "You gave me my first chance, sir. I'll never forget that. But if I can learn from you, I can make something that carries both our names, your lessons, and my hands." The old man stayed silent for a long time. Then, without looking at Daniel, he said, "Be here at 4 in the morning. Don't be late." That was the beginning. Every morning, before the sun even touched the hills. Daniel walked to the roastery through the fog. The world was quiet at that hour. No cars, no voices, just the sound of his footsteps and his own heartbeat. When he arrived, the shop was already alive with the hiss of machines and the smell of roasted beans. It wasn't easy. His hands burned, his back ached, and his clothes smelled like smoke every single day. The heat from the roasting drum made his skin sting, but he never complained. At first, everything he did went wrong. The beans came out too dark or too raw. Mr. Collins shook his head and said, "Not yet. Listen to the beans. They talk when they're ready." Daniel didn't understand what that meant, but he kept trying. He watched how the old man's hands moved, calm, sure, precise. There was rhythm in the work, almost like music. Slowly, Daniel started to feel it too. The smell of the beans told him when to stop. The color told him when to cool them. His heart began to move with the pea. Days turned into weeks. One morning, after dozens of failed batches, Daniel roasted a small bag of beans that smelled different, rich, deep, alive. Mr. Collins took one sip, nodded, and said quietly, "That's it." Those two words felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. Daniel smiled for the first time in days, his eyes shining. He had done it. From that day, he roasted his own beans every morning. He bought a small second-hand cart, painted it bright blue, and wrote on the side in white letters, "Daniel's Daily Brew." The first morning he rolled it into town, people stopped and smiled. "Hey, it's the coffee guy," one shouted. "Now he has a real cart." Another laughed. The smell of his coffee filled the air, warm, sweet, and inviting. Daniel didn't just sell coffee anymore. He sold hope. He told his customers stories about his early mornings, about how he burned his hands, and how Mr. Collins still scolded him sometimes. People listened, laughed, and kept coming back. They didn't just buy coffee, they bought a piece of his dream. Soon, his stand became more than just a place to grab a drink. It became a place where people talked, shared stories, and smiled before going to work. Children loved watching him pour milk into the cups, creating small foam hearts. Office workers stopped by just to hear his cheerful, "Good morning." The blue cart had become part of the town's heart. After months of hard work, Daniel had saved enough money to rent a small space on the corner of the main street. It wasn't big, just enough for a few tables, an old espresso machine, and a sign above the door that read, "Daniel's Daily Brew Cafe." When his parents saw it for the first time, they cried. His mother baked cookies every morning, and his father helped fix the chairs and clean the tables. For the first time in years, their little family worked together, not just to survive, but to build something. Every morning, the cafe filled with laughter and the smell of fresh coffee. Daniel would serve his first customer, then sit by the window for a moment, watching the sunrise through the glass. Sometimes, he thought about where he started, that cold morning when no one stopped for his coffee, when he almost gave up. Now, the same boy who once whispered dreams under the stars was standing in a place he had built with his own hands. He often said to himself, "This cafe isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who believed in me, to my father's words, to my mother's hands, and to Mr. Collins's trust." And sometimes, when Mr. Collins visited, he would sit quietly at the corner table with his cup. He never said much. But every time Daniel saw that small smile under the old man's mustache, he knew what it meant: pride. Still, Daniel's heart wasn't satisfied. He felt something inside whispering again, a quiet voice that said, "This is not the end. It's only the beginning." He wanted to create new flavors, to bring his coffee to other towns, maybe even to open another shop. The road ahead was long, but this time, Daniel wasn't afraid. He had learned something that no one could take away. That transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small moments, in burned hands, early mornings, kind words, and quiet persistence. And every time he handed a cup of coffee to a customer, he remembered that first morning with Mr. Collins, the laughter, the smoke, the fear, and the fire, because that was the moment everything changed. That was his turning point. Chapter 5. The Fire and the Faith. Life has a strange way of testing us just when we start to feel safe. Daniel had finally reached a place of peace. His cafe was running smoothly. Every morning, people filled the small shop with laughter, the smell of fresh coffee, and warm conversations. The blue sign outside, Daniel's Daily Brew, had become a symbol of hope for the whole town. He often looked around and thought, "This is what I dreamed of." But deep inside, he also knew, comfort can make us forget how strong we truly are, until life reminds us. One rainy night, that reminder came. The sound of thunder shook the windows as Daniel wiped down the counter, ready to close. His parents had already gone home, and the streets outside were almost empty. The smell of roasted coffee still floated in the air. He smiled, turned off the lights, and reached for his jacket. Then he saw it, a thin line of smoke rising near the espresso machine. His heart froze. "No," he whispered, running to unplug it. But within seconds, flames burst from the wires. The fire grew fast, licking the wooden shelves, devouring the curtains. Panic rushed through his body. He grabbed a bucket, threw water, and shouted for help. The rain outside mixed with the smoke inside, turning everything into chaos. By the time he managed to stop the flames, it was too late. His hands were burned, his clothes wet, and the cafe that had once smelled of coffee now smelled of ashes. The chairs were broken, the walls blackened. He stood in the middle of the ruined shop, shaking. The rain kept falling through the open door, washing away the ashes, as if erasing all his hard work. For a moment, Daniel wanted to cry, but no tears came, only silence. The next morning, when the town woke up, everyone heard the news. People came to see the damage, whispering softly. "Maybe this is the end for him," one said. "What a shame. He worked so hard," another added. Daniel stood outside, looking at the gray sky. His hands were trembling, but his voice was steady. "This is not the end," he said quietly. "It's just another beginning." Those words didn't come from pride. They came from faith. Deep down, he remembered every lesson he had learned, from his father's words about hard work, from Mr. Collins's patience, from his own failures and burns. This fire was not his end. It was his test. That night, instead of sleeping, Daniel cleaned. He scraped the soot off the walls, saved what little he could, and took the old coffee grinder home. It was heavy, but he carried it like treasure. The next morning, when people passed by his house, they smelled coffee again. Daniel had started brewing from his kitchen. "I won't stop," he said. "If I can't serve coffee in the shop, I'll serve it here." And something beautiful happened. His customers didn't leave him. One by one, they started showing up. Some brought sugar, others cups, a few gave small donations. An old lady placed a bag of flour on his table and said, "This is for the cookies your mother used to make." A group of students helped repaint the cafe's sign. Even the mayor came by one afternoon, patting Daniel on the shoulder and saying, "We'll see your cafe open again, son, I know it." Days turned into weeks. Every morning, Daniel brewed coffee in his tiny kitchen, and the smell spread through the street again. People came, even if it meant waiting outside under umbrellas. They didn't come just for coffee. They came for faith. They wanted to see hope in action, and Daniel gave it to them. one cup at a time. Months later, after endless hard work and kindness from others, Daniel's cafe was finally ready to reopen. The walls were newly painted, the furniture repaired, and the lights glowed warmly through the windows. The night before the reopening, Daniel stood alone in the quiet shop. He looked at the rebuilt counter, touched the clean wood, and closed his eyes. "You took everything once," he whispered to the memory of the fire, "but you also gave me something greater, strength." The next morning, the entire town gathered outside. The air was filled with music and the smell of roasted beans. The mayor cut a red ribbon and said proudly, "Daniel, you've shown us that hard work never fails." Daniel smiled, holding back tears. "Nothing comes easy," he said into the microphone, his voice soft but clear. "Not success, not respect, not love, but if you keep working, everything becomes possible." People clapped, some cried. His parents stood in the front row, holding hands, proud beyond words. Even Mr. Collins, the old roaster, was there. He raised his cup and nodded, a silent salute from teacher to student. From that day on, Daniel's Daily Brew wasn't just a cafe. It became a place where people came to remember that every storm passes, every fire fades, and every dream can rise again from the ashes. Tourists visited, not just for coffee, but for the story of a young man who never gave up. Sometimes, late at night, when the shop was quiet, Daniel would sit by the window and watch the street lights reflect on the wet pavement. He would think about that night of the fire, the fear, the pain, the smoke, and then look around at the warm light of his cafe, his family laughing, and his customers smiling. That's when he would whisper, "Thank you, life, you burned me, but you didn't break me." Because that's the truth about faith. It doesn't stop the fire. It helps you walk through it. And Daniel's story, like every cup of coffee he served, carried one powerful message for everyone who listened. Work hard, stay humble, never give up. Because yes, nothing is free, but everything is possible. Thank you so much for watching Inspiring English. If this video inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and send it to someone who needs a little English motivation today. And of course, hit the bell icon so you never miss the next lesson that can change your English, and maybe even your life.